Here's how I built new products in less than a day using AI. Let me show you. Alrighty. So again, for this walkthrough, I'm gonna use my custom Claude software that I built, actually using a very similar process to what I'm gonna show you. The tools we're gonna be using today are that tool, V0, and then Vercel. So it's gonna be Next.js and some of the tools that I've built here. And everything starts with a PRD, so a product requirements document. I have a system prompt here that helps me organize my thoughts into a document that then essentially gets fed to V0 or to another tool that then from the PRD extracts a V0 prompt that essentially instructs V0 to build the feature that we just talked about. And then usually I have some sort of prompt as part of the tool itself. So I also have a tool that writes a first prompt for me for the PRD to build the feature or the product, one feature, product, whatever, that kind of captures the core workflow. And it's not going to be perfect, but at the end of it, I will have something that we can essentially start iterating on and improve over time. And for those improvements, I don't necessarily use V0. It depends on the use case, but then I will switch to Windsurf and upload everything into a GitHub repository to do smaller iterations there. But for bigger features later on, I also have essentially a PRD type workflow. So I skip the V0 prompt, but I basically create PRDs and I hand the PRDs to Windsurf. And that makes it much, much, much better at following instructions and not doing stupid shit like deleting half your code base or implementing a bunch of stuff you didn't ask for, even with Sonnet 3.7, which I found to be very reliable this way. So again, usually it's a matter of how you use these tools, not necessarily the tool's fault, because these models are pretty good. Always remember kind of garbage in, garbage out. But yeah, let's get started. So yesterday, I was going through a strategy with a tool here called the Strategy Creator for AI hackathons. So I want to build stuff live as a live stream on a weekend. And I was going through a strategy and essentially I was asking, hey, because we want to partner with domain experts, what if I can find domain experts? And then it gave me a couple ideas. And one of them we're going to build today, the contract summarizer and comparer. So essentially it's a tool that ingests contracts, provides plain language summaries, highlights unusual clauses, and compares multiple contracts side by side to identify differences. Useful for freelancers, small business, and legal operations. All right, let's take that here. Go create a new chat, contract. Call this contract summarizer, whatever, right? Very simple tool, nothing fancy, just for the sake of showing you the workflow. I think it's useful to keep it lean. Let's go in. Again, I'm going to use Super Whisper to talk rather than write. Help me create a product. I'll let you know what the product is about. Ask me all the questions necessary in order to create the first PRD. So now I'm going to go in and I say, give me the PRD generator as the tool, which is essentially a system prompt that I showed you before that is used in order to steer the AI to do what I want. Similar to what Claude Projects is doing, like project instructions or system prompts in general, if you've ever used them. And now I'm just going to drop the description here that I just copied. All right. And now, because it's a completely new product, it will ask me a bunch of questions around purpose, user problem, target users, user stories, interaction, integrations. So a lot of bigger questions that we'll have to grapple with down the line. But for the sake of the exercise, let's keep it quite simple for now, which is what I'm going to say. Hey, let's keep it simple. I just want to provide a proof of concept with a very simple UI, no integrations and nothing fancy going on, just to compare, summarize two contracts. All right, so now we have a lean version in terms of questions. What file formats? Okay, let's stick to plain text for the sake of not having to build any sort of markdown conversion pipeline, whatever. That will keep it simple. And then, just an executive summary, and whatever I provided in the initial instructions. Those are the important elements. Differences, just which edits have been made. For example, if there's document revisions, I think those are interesting. Side-by-side view. For now, I think ideally side-by-side, some sort of GitHub style diff would be nice if we are comparing contracts. But for now, let's again keep it simple and choose the simplest way forward. And let's use freelancers. For now, I don't have timeline. I want to be done within the next 20 minutes. So let's get it done. All right, so now it will have a sort of PRD with user stories, requirements, what needs to happen, uploading contracts, summarizing contracts, detecting unusual clauses, comparing contracts, etc. Technology stack, I mean, I made all this shit up, so we can refine that. But overall, on a high level, or at a high level, this looks fine. Everything else is TBD, doesn't matter. Right? Like, this really depends on how deep you want to go. But again, from a high level, this looks like what we want to build, right? Obviously, always make sure that you don't go off the rails with the content here. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to switch to the V0 prompt generator, which essentially will create a prompt for us for V0 that I can just directly copy paste to V0 in order to build this out one way or another, right? So at least to give us like an initial build. All right, let's bring this into V0. Help me create a prompt. So what happened under the hood is that the system prompt got changed, right? So the context stays the same, but now the system prompt is not geared towards helping us brainstorm a PRD. It is about writing a prompt for V0. So that's what this tool usage is for. I get to keep the context around, but I can switch the real purpose of what's going on in the chat, essentially. All right, so here is now essentially our V0 prompt as part of this. Again, most of the power here is in the systems prompt, which I have created. I can show that in a separate video initially, how I created it initially. But yeah, and then iterated on, right, to produce something useful. This one is actually quite raw still. But yeah, so let's jump into V0 and let's say we want to build exactly what has been created, which includes everything we just talked about, right? So header section, tagline, upload section, 2 separate file upload areas, contract 1, contract 2, contract 1 summary, executive summary, key terms, payment details, timeline, termination clause, IP rights, interface, light color scheme, good contrast for readability. So also has some sort of best practices for the UI design, which I guess should also be built into V0. So you probably don't necessarily need to have that. And for demonstration, include sample text. So this is a very prompt, which makes it much easier for V0 to nail what you want. Obviously, if you wanted to, you could go in here and you could continue to iterate on this and add things, or, you know, put a major focus on the upload UI. Oh, I forgot to talk, but yeah, let's do it like this instead of the headline and tagline. So it kind of sounded like it was creating an upload area with a kind of hero section at the top, almost like a landing page where that stuff lives, which is a bit of an odd thing, right? It's cool as a demo, but it's not, doesn't make sense as a product you use every day that you have a landing page and a app in one thing. But yeah, so this is the result. We have upload contract 1 and a drag and drop thingy, and we have upload contract 2 and a drag and drop thingy. And what we're going to do is we're going to use this tool again and say, write a sample contract, because we need to test if it works, that I can use to test this prompt, right? So I need something to test. And why not have the tool created? Because we already know in the context in the chat, we already know the criteria that we're looking for. So I want to make it as simple as possible. All right, standard freelance service agreement. All right, you can use this as contract 2. And now back to talking. Right, help create a second contract that I can use to test the tool with some changes according to what the tool is looking for and scanning for. when comparing contracts to have a great demo. So now I'll also go in and have contract 2 for testing generated, and then we can go in and test if this actually works. I don't think it will work because we don't have any, from what I've seen, we don't have any AI component because we don't have a backend. So there's definitely something missing, but we'll get to that in a second. All right, actually I had to go in and I had to save those as TXT files just because the upload works as TXT. We could go in and we could say, don't make an upload, make it 2 text fields, which we can do now. Hey, let's also provide a text field, not just an upload form for the contract where I can copy paste the contract into, because sometimes I don't have files, I just have raw text. Let's offer both versions in the UI in order to make it very simple for the user to use this tool. And then V0 is going to go in and it's going to try to implement those changes. And while it's doing that, I'm going to switch the tool again, because now, and that's what I meant with the AI component, which is missing, we actually need to create a prompt for the tool itself, right? For the workflow itself, because now we had a V0 prompt, but we also need the V0 app to do something, which is what we're going to do now. Hi, please provide the prompt for me that I can use to implement this app. Hey, help me create a system prompt for the process and workflow that runs in the background here, so that I can add that to the V0 implementation. All right, so now it's going to go ahead and create a prompt for me with the PRD prompt generator. So essentially taking the PRD and creating a prompt for the workflow, which will include everything we discussed because we're still in the same chat. So it has all the context it needs in order to create a good prompt. I'm not 100% happy with this. It might be a problem of the system prompt here for the PRD prompt generator, or it's getting confused with the V0 stuff that came before, but it's not following best practices for system prompts. So we'll iterate again, check the work and use your brain, you know, it's there for a reason. Make sure the system prompt follows proper best practices. System prompts like roles, and change the prompt accordingly. The prompt will run with GPT-4. All right, so let's iterate. And this already looks better, right? So we have a role and goal, we have constraints, the workflow, proper markdown formatting, right? And it provided an example, which is always helpful. You have one shot or few shot prompts. Fucked around with the formatting here a bit, I think because it was markdown in the markdown. So we'll copy paste this. And now we see here that V0 is done. We can either paste or upload files. I'm assuming that if we do upload this now, nothing will happen because there's no prompt yet, but let's confirm. Happy to be surprised. Yeah, I think this is just, okay, so there's something happening, but this is just mocked or not. Contract. Yeah, so this is just mocked text, so it's not functional, but we can actually also use V0 to make it functional by saying something like, hey, let's make this contract not mocked in the UI, but make it functional. Let's use the Vercel AI SDK to implement a prompt, and I will provide the prompt to you that you should be using to make this happen. Let's stick with GPT-4o mini as the model and make a modal that collects the API key that I want to use with the tool in order to have the user input their API key when they want to use the tool once, and then use the same API key every time going forward, as long as it is provided. All right, and now I'm gonna paste the prompt that I have created in my tool. Let's see what happens. All right, I've created an API key. Now it asks me to set it, which I will do here. We'll have to provide the files again. I still didn't see any server-side code, so let's see where this is coming from. All right, so there's server-side code here. There is the prompt itself. So that is all good. However, it's failing, saying there's no API key. Let's see how it's running this. All right, let's try to use V0 to fix the error. All right, so it actually messed it up. It didn't help. Let's change the approach. All right, let's change that back to what it was before. The style is correct, but let's maybe move the call to the OpenAI API to the server side in an API route and try it that way. You should always run the stuff on the server side anyway. It might be something we can improve in the system prompt for the prompt generator, for the V0 prompt generator, to clarify that it should run on the server side. But it's also something I should have mentioned in the PRD in the beginning. So the more context you can give in the beginning, the less stuff you'll have to fix later on, obviously. All right, so it's still not working. And I think that the issue is here with the implementation of how the API key is passed. So I just pulled up the AI SDK docs because it didn't work to do it within V0. All right, at least now it's doing something. Let's see if that did the trick. And then we'll get to see the rest of the UI because we actually haven't even seen that part. Alrighty, so we have our contract 1 summary, unusual clauses, disclaimer, which is just an AI disclaimer, and a comparison, which looks a bit odd, but for the sake of keeping it simple here, we could go in and we could ask it to properly show it as markdown, which it did here, right? Total fee 5,000, total fixed fee. But yeah, I mean, super simple workflow. But if you have a contract that gets edited a lot and you don't want to scan the whole thing to figure out what happened to it, this could be an interesting tool, either internally or externally. I don't deal with a lot of contracts, so I wouldn't know. But yeah, I thought it was interesting. And if we wanted to add something here, let's say, right, include a version that is essentially a executive summary for a 5-year-old using common language and simplifying all the terms. So add that to the prompt. So what we do now is essentially see if V0 can help us tweak this even further. All right, I'm trying it again. Let's see if that worked. All right, now here we have a simple explanation. That is essentially what I asked for. And one thing we can do to make sure we cover everything is we can take an output of the tool and see if it covers all the things we have discussed here. So let's go in and say, here's an example output of the tool now that we have implemented it. Let's review it and make sure that we're not missing anything in the contract summary. So I essentially copy pasted the analysis, and it looks at the strengths, looks at potential improvements and suggested additions. So essentially we can, just make sure we're covering everything. If any of this stuff is interesting, then we could add it. And what I'm also gonna look at is another tool here that is a persona simulator. So this impersonates the potential user or customer of this product, and they could add another layer of feedback that I can also go in and implement if I wanted to, by switching between these tools, right? So now I can go in and say, hey, give me 10 freelancers that match the profile here in the chat history of what we've talked about, and give me their opinion on the output of the contract, if everything is clear, if there is something missing, and what they would like to see in order to make a better product for them. So what it's going to do now, it's going to give me 10 different freelancers from different backgrounds and give me their on what they think is missing here in the output, because the output is for them, right? So they would potentially be the user, and they can give suggestions. Okay, so they praised several freelancers mentioned wanting clear risk assessment with actionable recommendations rather than just justifications, just identification of issues. Jurisdiction specific insights. Okay, so these are things that are maybe a bit tougher to get. We would have to connect it to some sort of external API maybe, or data sources that help us with this. More practical guidance on next steps after identifying problematic clauses. So yeah, essentially by these 10 people, different age groups, different backgrounds, photographer, social media manager. If we wanted to narrow it down and we only want to do one sort of freelancer, we could just provide that to the tool and say, hey, give me 10 software development freelancers, right? So if I wanted to niche it down, I could do that. But for now, this would be fine. And what I can do now is I can go back to the V0 prompt generator and say, hey, give me a updated prompt for V0 that encapsulates some of these recommendations that have been made by the freelancers, and make sure we have them in the output. Anything that doesn't rely on some sort of external API. Yeah, let's have a look what that could look like. All right, so let's make sure it actually improved something. Which improvements did you make? All right, so it says, okay, I have enhanced payment terms, I have intellectual property, scope and obligations, clarity, expanded, blah, blah. What it did though is it created a prompt from scratch. So essentially it gave all the design feedback, etc., etc. But what I wanted is I just wanted the change set. So let's try, see if that works. Hey, you provided me with a prompt for V0 that I can use if I was to create the app from scratch. However, I already have an existing design and prototype or whatever, and I just want to implement those improvements and changes. So make sure that the prompt for V0 takes that into consideration, and it's just a kind of enhancement prompt rather than building everything from scratch kind of prompt. So let's reflect that in the prompt. All right, so this looks better. It says current structure to preserve, enhancements to implement. To be honest, I tried this, so I'll do it live, see what happens. Otherwise, to preserve this, I can always go ahead and deploy this version. So it will create something that you can share with external people if they wanted to look at it. And you can also set custom domains, which makes it super simple to get something out and going and shareable within a couple minutes. And while that is deploying, let's go in and ask the follow-up. Just copy paste stuff here. Anything within the V0 prompt XML tags, basically. So seeing here, it only edited the UI components, so it didn't add anything to the prompt, which means I'm almost certain that it didn't actually implement those changes in the final output, which is something we need to ask it to do. Maybe it was too much in one go. Make sure that the prompt also the new sections we've just added, because I think right now it doesn't. If V0 was not gonna do this well, which it might, I'm not sure, we can also go back into this tool, say use this prompt generator in order to update the initial prompt. But let's see what it does. I think it does look like it's adding relevant sections. So let's try it one more time. Right, we can see overall assessment, this is new, payment terms, confidentiality, liability. All right, some practical next steps. Let's see. What we can do again is go in, copy this, go back to our tool and say, here's an updated example output of the tool implementation. Let's cross-check that with the changes we wanted to implement and make sure we cover everything. If we don't cover everything, let me know what's missing. So we're essentially using AI again to just validate, right? Like we could scan it ourselves, or we could just ask, because all the context is here. So the thing is like much smarter than us because we fed it all the right information. If I was to give it to an empty chat, it's gonna give me bullshit, right? All right, let's see what it says. All right, so it says, hey, look, here's the stuff that's been implemented. Overall risk assessment, key structure, blah, blah. Some shit's just partially implemented and what's not yet implemented. But for now, let's call it a day. Make sure we deploy it again to make sure we can share it with people, because otherwise we can't get feedback from, let's say, a freelancer, someone to give this to that can pipe a real contract through this. While this is deploying, it looks like the comparison is also looking better now. I do think that it's an inconsistency in the output of the prompt that led to the messed up presentation. So that's something we need to have a look at. But it's also not the end of the day, as long as it produces the right output. And yeah, we could also go in and copy paste this comparison into the tool, into the chat that we have going on to make sure we're not missing anything. We can do the same thing. We can do another iteration and implement improvements. All right, and here we have it deployed. Let's see if it works. Yeah, looks like it does. So I've provided my API key. We don't have to wait for the result, but it's kicked off the analysis, and that's it. So essentially we built this. A video that I've been recording is like 1 hour now. Most of it is talking through stuff, which makes it take a lot longer. So I think without talking, this would be 30 minutes, 45 minutes from an idea to a deployed app that I can share with people and start to get real feedback, not the simulated feedback I've showed you. But I think, almost no code. I don't think I wrote code. One time I had to look up docs. Obviously, again, just use some common sense. Don't take what the AI outputs as the, holy grail. But I think in terms of speed and speed of iteration, which I think is the most important thing, right? So let's say I would build this by hand. I can build this fairly fast. It's a fairly simple app. Let's say it takes me a day or something like that to build by hand. The first time I could get feedback from someone would be tomorrow. But now I can send this out the day it's 1 p.m. I can still get feedback today. And then tomorrow morning, I can, or even by the end of the day, I can go in and I can implement that feedback, right? And with every time that you save this much time, especially today, I'm still fully in the context of it, so I don't lose the context. I don't have the cold start cost of doing it tomorrow. These savings, they compound, right? And that's the key kind of advantage with AI tools, is that you can do everything in more focused kind of batches, and there's not so much loss between those batches. I think, that is the main kind of takeaway here. And one other thing I want to show you is essentially, this is just the beginning, right? So this is our workflow for kind of a prototype session. If it's a new product, we go in, we create the strategy, we create a new chat here, we create a PRD. I've showed you this. We create an LLM prompt for a tool if there is a AI workflow. We create a V0 prompt. We go to V0. We keep iterating. If it's a new project, what we'll do is we'll download here. You can go on here, say add to code base. And there's two ways. There's an npx command or there's a zip. If it's a new project, I'll just download the zip and then I'll yarn install. I will fix some of the configs. So V0 doesn't generate proper configs. I think it's a misconfiguration with the Tailwind version and something like that, and post CSS or whatever. So I had to tinker with this a bit. So I have those gists here, which are essentially just snippets that I have to replace in the downloaded file. So that's definitely something they can still improve. Those 3 files, create a GitHub repo, and then deploy that from that GitHub repo to Vercel, which gives me a real life version of that, not just the one that I showed you, the Sherm here. And from then on, I will, if I go use V0 for new pages, I will essentially use the other way of doing it, which is to npx install, because then it just pulls in a new page and I can continue with my work. Or I just go in and use Windsurf or Cursor, doesn't matter. But essentially, every time I want to make a change, for every feature I start a new chat, I usually use write mode. If it's a small feature, small change, I just talk to Windsurf and that will implement it for me, or transcribe it, then implement it for me here. Or if it's a big one, I will go in and create a PRD again. I think creating a PRD every time for every single feature is overkill. Most of the time it understands what you want, and I think talking and transcribing that helps to add more context usually, at least for me, right? So if I write, I'm quite lazy and I don't give enough information in order for it to have enough context to implement something good. But if I talk, I have a tendency to talk more than is necessary, which sometimes can be a disadvantage, but here it's good because it gives the model more context to understand what exactly I'm saying, which will then lead to a better result. So I've seen much better results with talking, giving context that way than with writing, just as a kind of learning to take away. And yeah, hope this was interesting, maybe a bit dry in some areas, but that's how I do it. That's how I built whole products. That's how I've built this whole tool, which by now is not a crazy big app, but it is big enough, and it 10x's my output, which is what's more important, right? Like, what is the impact and the outcome, rather than how big of an app is it. And I think that is something to keep in mind when validating these tools that you built. And obviously, something we haven't discussed is how you can build a mode, for example, with these things, which I also have a tool for, of course, which we can try out. Just another tool has a document as context that is the types of modes that exist. All right. And it also gives me a kind of strategic implementation plan for data network effects, switching costs. One mode I think that we can use for this is to price it if there's competition, which we haven't looked at, but if there's classic SaaS competition, I think one mode could be outcome-based pricing, or basically pricing every time I analyze a contract costs you $1 or something over subscription fee, because that's much more in line with the value that people get out. It's a very occasional product, so they don't necessarily need to use that all the time. And I think also in terms of marketing, this probably lends itself well to SEO. But yeah, these are completely different topics discussed better in another video. But what the takeaway is here is, I think as the cost to build things goes down, these things will become more important. So modes, distribution, USP, what knowledge do you have that no frontier model has, because it's proprietary to you, to your journey, and thinking about that mostly. And then building, like, that's the real work. And then building is just a means to an end to get there. And that's why it's great that I can build faster, because all I want to do with building is I want to prove that what I envision is correct and to validate it, right? And the faster I can do that, the better. But the real work, again, and the real thinking should go into all these other things that have nothing to do with building the thing. But yeah, all right. If that stuff sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe below, and I'll see you next time. All right, cheers.